It's the Alien Conspiracy Podcast. I am your host, Agent Anderson. Come along as we examine UFO sightings, conspiracies, and all things strange. You can follow the show on Twitter at AlienConPod. We also have an email address, alienconpod@protonmail.com. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to check us out on Discord and Facebook. This week's episode, Peter Slattery is here to talk about his film, Multidimensional, which is out now. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on. We don't normally do guests, so we usually do like a historical look, so it's pretty exciting to change it up for a bit. I really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So your film is called Multidimensional, and it just came out on the 19th, I believe?
Yeah, yep.
Okay, and it's about your experiences with UFOs over the years, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and one interesting thing I saw in the film was that your first experience with the UFO was when you were 12 years old.
Yeah, quite some time ago. Yeah, it was in a town called Albury in a suburb of Lavington, sort of a small town between Melbourne and Sydney, Australia. So it's probably closer to Melbourne, but it's pretty much halfway in between, we could say, just a ballpark area. And there's a highway that goes from Melbourne to Sydney called the Hume Highway or the Hume Freeway. And yeah, the first sighting, I was actually leaving my father's house to go down the road to a gas station. We call it a petrol station here, or a servo. And on the way down, I got probably a block and a half, maybe 2 blocks away from the service station. And there was the only way I can describe it was more like the weight. If you pulled a weight off the bar at the gym and you flipped it sideways, it pretty much looked like that. But this thing was huge. Like I say, it's had to have been about 3 times the size of a football field. It was absolutely gigantic, and I couldn't really see anything to it except the shape, and it was like a matte grey. Now, it appeared sort of slightly to the right of me, in front of me, which is sort of, we could say, just slightly northeast, and it just went west until out of view. But from what I know, nobody ever saw that. I don't know how anybody else didn't see that, but that was my first encounter. Going back to the age of 12, so that was quite some time ago. I'm 37 now, so that was some years ago.
Wow, that's a pretty extraordinary sighting. I think a lot of the times other people do see things, they just don't report it, maybe out of fear of ridicule or something like that, or maybe they just don't know where to report it to. So maybe somebody else did see it. Who knows?
Yeah, I do wonder, because I do know other people later from that experience that they hadn't seen that exact object, but people were telling me they were seeing stuff around the exact same area at that time as well. So, but like you said, there could have been definitely other people see it, but a lot of the time, I think a lot of the sightings don't go reported. Fear of ridicule, or they don't know how to report a number of things, like you said.
Yeah. So you've actually had multiple sightings. After this first sighting, you continued to see more UFOs throughout your life. How often do you see them?
Well, now I see them. Sometimes it could be a couple of days in a row. Sometimes it will be weekly, or it could be monthly. It's no sort of schedule to it. It sort of just happens when it happens. As weird as this sounds to other people, due to what we could say, having contact with some of these intelligences, I think some things just pick up on me, which is getting a bit into the weird stuff now. But like I filmed one. I saw 2 last night. The night before, there was a craft that I got telepathic communication to walk out, and it flew by, and I'm about to put that up as well. So it's something that's ongoing, and I've got a sanctuary now where people can come and visit and have these experiences themselves. But I don't think you have to even come here. You can be anywhere in the world and experience this type of phenomena. And this is where it gets very laid, but it's an ongoing, regular thing.
So you put these videos up on a website?
Yeah, they're up on YouTube. So people go to just type in Peter Maxwell Slattery YouTube channel. It will just come straight up, and there's very small percentage of the sightings on there, though. What I would say is good quality out of the archive that I've got. There's probably it's hard to put a figure on it, maybe 50 videos, something like that up.
Wow. that's a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, people can go and see it for themselves there.
Okay, I'll find that and put it in the description of the episode if anybody wants the link. It'll be there. Yeah, and one thing that's difficult when getting these videos, a lot of skeptics will say, well, if there's these UFOs all over the place, why don't we have good videos? I've actually seen things in the sky before and tried to record them with my cell phone, things like airplanes, or once I tried recording a Mylar balloon, and they just don't show up in cameras really well. So I haven't actually seen your YouTube channel. I'm excited to see how well you've been able to capture these things. Do you just use a cell phone, or have you got like a dedicated camera for it?
Oh, mate, I've got about, geez. Like even now, I've put up 8 security cameras around the house and in the house. I've got about $20,000 worth of equipment. I've got a Sony A7 S2, which is like about a $7,000 camera with a telephoto lens on it. I've got, usually what I'm using is a Panasonic 4K camera with, I think it's 30 times zoom, but it actually does all right. It goes up to 1500 digital zoom, but usually I'll blow it past, probably get it to about 50 times zoom, but that's a 4K camera. So the thing with my stuff is a lot of it's filmed in 4K. I'd say about a quarter of the time, if not a little bit less, I'm using a tripod. It depends how long they're staying around for and what they're doing, because a lot of the time they will appear right overhead, and to film something on a tripod directly overhead is quite hard. So, yeah, like if you go and look through my stuff, some of it's quite clear. I would say pretty much, some of the clearest footage out there. There's people like Antonio Urzi and others that have got extremely clear footage. But yeah, I'm using pretty much the best cameras that you can for this type of thing. And what happens is sometimes there is an energetic field to it where there is a bit of a distortion. I would say most of my stuff only has a slight distortion to it, and it's probably from the digital zoom once it's hitting that, because I'm trying to push the barriers to try and get it as clear as possible.
Okay, so you have the good stuff. Top-notch equipment. Yeah.
Well, it's just because over the years it's a constant thing, and then I've got over 300 witnesses in my home that have seen this stuff, let alone thousands around the world when I've travelled. But you get to a point where you just say, bug it. I've just got to get a really good camera, and I've got a few different types where, I've got infrared ones for in the home and that I can use outside, as well as coloured night vision I'm now using as well, which is a psionics camera, which is actually the police and I believe military forces somewhat, from what I've been told, are using some of these psionics cameras as well. So I'm using that mainly for nighttime. The zoom isn't the best, but it gives you really good clarity for reference points.
One thing you said that was interesting was that you sort of get a feeling that they're there. I've heard other people who have sightings talk about they have like a compulsion, sort of like they go outside and they're not really in control of their body. Is it something like that, or is it more like you just kind of know that they're there?
It's a number of things. What I call it these days, because this is sort of how the interactions work as well, I call it thought transfer. So I'll give you an example, because before I was known for this, I was the bloke that you'd call to some of the haunted houses in Australia, and I was doing a lot of paranormal investigation, and I was also logging a lot of UFO reports, trying to figure out basically what was happening for myself. Plus, nobody was sort of there to help experiences at that time, while people are having extraordinary things happen to them. So now these days, especially from the contacts, I'll just give you a couple of examples, like an analogies for how this will work. So sometimes I'll ask people, was there anything going on before this? And it's like they'll say, I just went outside to go and check the mail, or I had to go outside and check if the car window was up or if the car was locked. Now, as menial as that sounds, with my experiences at the start, that's how it started in later years, meaning when I was starting to film this on a regular basis. So what I put to researchers and investigators is that that's a thought implanted in their mind that they perceive as their own thought. So for me now, I get a thought where here, come outside, but it sounds like my own thought being projected to me. So this is why I call it thought transfer, and it's so mundane that, as out far as this is going to sound, I believe every single human being is having contact on a regular basis, if not daily, even if it's just for a thought or two throughout the day. It's not to say we don't have our own thoughts, But when we've got guidance, intuition, or there's a thought coming through like an epiphany, I actually believe that's spirit guides or some form of intelligence that we're working with on the other side communicating to us, because that's how it works for me.
Huh.
And sometimes when I'm filming the craft, I'm actually on the craft in my mind, like I'm looking into two screens. I can see the craft with my eyes and I'm filming the craft, but also at the same time in my mind's eye, which is where we have our dreams and inner vision, I'm actually able to see the intelligences on the craft or merge my consciousness with them.
Well, that's interesting. And I think that idea is something that everybody's experienced, where you feel, I have to go outside and check this, or I forgot to do this outside. And it seems like a totally normal thing, but it might not be something that you usually do. What kind What kind of UFOs do you see? Are there different types?
Oh, mate, like I'm going to be releasing a lot more. I didn't even put, it was such a small percentage, not even double digits of the percentage of things I got in that film. But I've seen orbs, I've seen egg-shaped crafts, I've seen shape-shifting crafts. There's clusters, there's fleets, there's flying saucers, there's discs, cigar-shaped crafts, triangles. The list goes on, mate. It really is. It sounds ridiculous, and I know that to some people that don't know my story or myself, or maybe new to the topic, this is going to sound absolutely psychotic, but I've got to tell it like it is. Like, people can go and see the stuff for themselves, even at petermaxwellslattery.com, or the documentary Multidimensional. You can see the vast range of different types of things that I'm capturing.
Interesting. Is there one type of UFO that is more common than the others, or is it pretty much just a mixed bag?
What I would say is the egg-shaped crafts, also the orb-shaped crafts, which are either a white light or they'll be an orange light. And what I would say is there's a various types of sources and discs that I see as well. They're the main things. Rarely will I see the triangles or the cigars or shape-shifting crafts. But there's a lot of stuff I've captured of that type as well. So, yeah, it's mainly the orbs, the egg shape, and then I would say after that would probably be the sources.
Do you think there's a different purpose for these? For example, maybe one type is, I don't know, maybe a scout ship, and another is for a different purpose, maybe doing, taking mapping of the ground, or I don't know, whatever. Is there a purpose you can tell, or is it unclear what these ships are here for and what the shapes have to do with what the ship is doing?
Well, I can't say 100% across the board. I can only go by my experiences with interaction with these intelligences. There is what I would say types of orbs which are sent out to do reconnaissance. There is scout ships physical. This is where it gets into the realm of what is it that's the craft either being sent from or a part of, because when we're talking about light ships, sometimes there may be a flickering light, and it's actually a being in its light body. We could even say an angelic type entity. So some of these crafts are completely non-physical. It's a being in and of itself. Some of them, when it gets to more physical nuts and bolts, I would say, though there's not nuts and bolts in them, it would be more of a less advanced civilization that's just a little bit more advanced than us, but it would appear like magic what it can do. Then we've also got the military type of stuff, or not even military, would go beyond that and say, we could say covert groups that are using this technology. So it's really across the board why they're being used. I think that some of these intelligences are living right beside us. Some have got bases here. Some are coming from different star systems, and some are coming from complete different realms where there's no planets or stars.
Huh. That's fascinating. One type of UFO that you mentioned in your movie that I believe you actually have a film of is the blue orbs that appear in your house. And I got to be honest, this absolutely terrifies me because, your house is your castle. You should be safe in there, but they're even coming into your house. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, as you can see in the movie, I've got videos of a grey in the house. I've got a grey that was on the roof walking around, and I ended up capturing that outside. I didn't see that at the time. And then these blue orbs, the blue orbs, the way I can describe it, and I've been talking about this for years, that the blue orbs actually transform into these liquid blue light beings. And through a series of interactions, they told me that they were the Elohim. That's all I can tell you. I'm not trying to get biblical, cultish, anything. That's exactly what they've told me. So that humanoid form of them projecting into these 7-foot tall light beings and they look nor male nor female, but they do tend to look more masculine. There's no parts to them, but it's actually what we could say a projection, or they're manifesting that from an orb form, that their pure state is an orb.
Oh, interesting. So do you think those are projections and maybe they're not physically there, at least not as we understand it? Because remember the pictures, especially the one that was next to your truck, which, oh man, that just creeps me out. Like it's kind of terrifies me. I guess I haven't had an experience like that though. Maybe if I had, it wouldn't be quite so scary to me. But so do you think
it's still a bit freaky to me, mate. Like I interact with these beings. The greys aren't a regular thing, but that's just freaky to know that something was there, yet I couldn't see it, and I was investigating it, walking around, but nothing was there, but it was on the image. But yeah, sorry to cut you off.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. I guess I was wondering, so do you think, are any of these creatures, are they like physically there, or maybe they're just a projection like you're saying?
Well, what I mean by projection is that they turn from the orb into the 7-foot tall light being. Like It's almost like they grow into it in a split second. But what I can tell you is that some of these beings that interact with me are meditating on another planet and projecting themselves, like you're saying. Sometimes they can do that from a craft, or they've got assisted technologies. But with the greys, and there are many species of greys, what I can tell you is that they can appear completely physical. Though with the video, for example, and even the photo, what I'd say, to me, that's physical, because when I sent the original to Jason Gleaves to do the image analysis, which is ex-UK Air Force and Aerospace, the original photo is exponentially clear, but it's on a new iPhone that takes these photos. They're almost like 3-second exposure shots, and it was extremely clear. The only reason it looks blurred and out of, we could say, complete clearness is because I've altered it so you don't have to search for it. But it's completely clear, the original photo, and it's in darkness, though there was 2 lights nearby. So, yeah, like the original is completely clear. But, like, for example, with the alien video with John Vivanco, he's worked with a team of, like, I think 40 remote viewers on my case. And he's worked for the FBI and NASA as, like, a psychic spy and doing things. He when he remote viewed that video, the conclusion was that it's real, of course, but that there was a craft that crashed, landed half in the house and outside. Now, when I say this, it's like in apparition form, like a ghost. And I think he was saying that there was 5 entities on board that craft. And yeah, like the way I can describe it is that they can appear like ghosts. So they can become more physical, but they can also become like an apparition. This is where I say the paranormal and the UFO and the spiritual communities really need to sort of like look at each other's aspects, because this is where it all starts to blend in. That some people I found that think they're having got hauntings at their home are actually having ET contact. Some that think they're having ET contact, their house is haunted, or they've got an intelligent haunting going on in their home. So it really bleeds over, because these, I believe, not just when we're talking about apparitions, but these multidimensional beings, whether they're aliens or angels or what have you, or inner earth beings, we could even probably put Bigfoot and fairies into it, they can cross dimensions and they appear like a ghost, but they can also physically materialize. But I believe how physical depends on how far of a frequency they're usually operating on. Is it too hard for them to come down, or are they able to just to break through? Or can they fully materialize because they're closer to this frequency vibrational wise?
I've always found that interesting, the idea of multiple dimensions. And for example, one idea I've had is that, well, this isn't my idea, I've heard it elsewhere, but the idea that, dark matter, that there's all this matter in the universe that we cannot directly observe. And it makes me wonder, is there like a 4th spatial dimension? In other words, there's another dimension in the room that we cannot perceive, so there could be something in the room with you, and it just has to sort of turn a dimensional corner to be there if it wants to. Do you think it's something like that, or do you think these dimensions exist elsewhere, and where that elsewhere is something that we haven't really figured out what it is yet?
No, like the way I understand it is that occupying your same space and time right now is infinite dimensions, and some of them are created, most of them are created through thought from other intelligences within God's source created, the way I can describe it. Now, for example, it's like if you hit a string on the guitar, say the top string, that's your reality. But if you change your frequency and hit the string below it, then that becomes your reality. So it depends on your vibration. We've got to remember here, and the way I can describe this is we can scientifically today, and I talk about this in my talks and presentations with science, We can only see a fraction of 0.005% of physical matter, and that is a very small bandwidth, which is the visible light spectrum. In some cases, we can see the ultraviolet, the infrared, microwaves, gamma waves. This is all basically that, and radio frequencies and TV frequencies. That's all we can even perceive, and only a fraction of that 0.005% can we physically see. Again, it's the visible light spectrum. So what's happening is some of these crafts, and I've spoke to Native American elders and Aboriginal elders here in Australia about this because I talked to them about this, was that these crafts will land on you in your bed and you might feel a hum, and what they can do is vibrate your consciousness on board or even physically on board the craft depending on the beings and the intelligence. And what's happening is you're not going anywhere. They're vibrating you to resonate with their frequency, and therefore you think you might go into space or you're on another planet. No, you're occupying the same space, but you're in a different time. You're in a different frequency. So you haven't gone anywhere. You're exactly where you are, but you've phased out and gone into another reality. So this is where I think it's infinite. And I think it depends on your level of consciousness to what you can raise it to what you can actually interact with. So it might sound far out there, but when we look at science, science really doesn't know much. And especially with what's in the public domain compared to what we could say is not in the public domain, that's held back. Even when we look at ancient science, it seems that the ancients had a lot more knowledge on a lot more things, looking at the pyramids and other things that we still can't replicate, than today. So I think what I say to people is even when you're looking at things dimensionally, you've got to throw linear thinking out the window. It's not to say don't be discerning, don't be skeptical. We need those things to be healthy and to come to the truth. But if you're going to look at this topic in a linear aspect, you're going to get absolutely nowhere, which it took me years to understand that. You've got to look at things as all possibility, 360-degree unboundedly in every single way, or else you're not going to come to it. Because what I say to people is people want a yes, no, black, white, this way, that way. The shade of grey in between both of those things is actually where most of these answers lie, unfortunately. It's not so straightforward.
You mentioned that you've encountered multiple different types of aliens, like different species. Are they all, do they all look like the gray, or are there, I've heard of like insectoid types before. Follow-up question to that also is, do any of them communicate with you at all? Or is it just, you just see them and they're observing you?
Oh, it was starting out as observing since I was about 8 years old. It wasn't until around 2011 that there was starting to be somewhat a dialogue, that there is conversations between us now, mainly through thought projection back and forth, where I'm getting thoughts, feelings, and visions from them, and I'm projecting thoughts back. Now, it's going to sound, again, off the wall, but I've seen various types of greys, various types of insectoid and mantid type energies and beings. Some of them, sometimes they'll appear as sort of like a holographic form of light being. Different types of what we could say light being forms in and of itself. I've seen feline beings. I've seen beings that look like they're from the movie ET, but they've got black eyes and their face is sort of more compacted and they're a lot darker brown. And a lot of them, a majority of them, what I'll tell you, they look exactly like you and I. You wouldn't even be able to spot the difference if they were in a crowd.
Huh, interesting. That's one of the things that you discuss in the film, is actually that there are hybrid people that have hybrid DNA that are walking around. Is this like a creation, or is this something that was naturally with us from the beginning?
Well, the way I described it is that the first humans were manifested through thought, and they were nor male nor female. And this gets into a very convoluted thing through what we can say manipulation over time to create the reincarnation process to allow a soul to incarnate into the body. But where we're at now is human beings on this earth are like a super being in the 3D realm. We're a conglomerate of many different races. But what I do tend to find from the information that I've been told is that most beings in this sector of space have Lyran genetics. So that's the star system. Vega is what's there now. The main star of the Lyra system is now no longer with us. And that these beings sort of reached out and put many outposts going back 20 million years ago. Now, when I say that, I believe humans actually go back billions of years. But modern times, and this goes into a story that I'll tell you, that I've covered in other talks also with the king of the Raven tribe, Ulukai Brendan Murray, here in Australia, and James Gilliland from the East Ranch in America, because the information I was told by a Pleiadian, and it ties in with them, and you can actually go to this place called Gosford Glyphs in Australia. The story is that the ancient Egyptians were coming to Australia to get their ancient knowledge, and there's a wall at this glyph site, this ancient structure actually, that's got original Egyptian hieroglyphs. Now, there's one down the end of the glyph set that's actually fake that was put there later on to try and discredit, but apparently it's been authenticated, the rest of them, by the Egyptian authorities. Now, what was happening was these pharaohs were coming to Australia to get their mystery school teachings from the Aboriginals, and these two pharaohs one day that were brothers came here and they stole these rocks that stored the information, the story goes, and the Aboriginals said you can take it, but spirit won't let you take them off the land. So one got bitten by a snake and died on the spot, and the other one got shipwrecked. Basically, as soon as he tried to leave Australia, he got shipwrecked and died. And the other wall, why I'm saying this, the other wall at the glyphs there, it's written in stone, is called the Pleiadian wall, that was brought from 100 kilometres away. They can't explain how the wall got there. And it tied in with the information that I was told, but like I sort of added to it, or it added to my story and a few others with the elders and that I spoke to, was that the Pleiadians had come here, manipulated the Denisovian, and created this Australian Aboriginal to incarnate in and have the human experience. And what I can tell you is that Aboriginal remains have been found in so many countries, in Japan before the Japanese were there, in Africa before the African was there, in India before the Indian was there. And so when you do research into this, I think it's the Africans or the Indians, I'm not sure which one, but when I talk to the scientists and researchers, in America, they've found Aboriginal remains that predate the Native Americans. But then again, you've had ancient giants there as well that could do that. But what I'm saying is the science is now showing, and it's called an out of Australia theory now instead of out of Africa, that everyone comes out of Africa. Now, I know that the Lyrians were coming here back to 500,000 years ago, and that the reptilians had short custodianship, and then after that was the Pleiadians were given custodianship, and that's when what we could say the modern man that you and I are now through genetic manipulation, which even people like Greg Braden say that around 200,000 years ago, our human that we are now just came into being. They can't explain it. There's no missing link. They can't find it. That is the missing link, is what I've just told you, is that the Pleiadians came here and manipulated the Denisovian so they could incarnate into it and have the human experience, which is the Australian Aboriginal. And apparently, through really in-depth DNA analysis, you'll actually find that everyone on the planet, no matter how minute, will have Australian Aboriginal DNA.
Huh, fascinating.
And the scientists, which had Irish background, tested themselves, and they even had Aboriginal DNA in them. Not these little tests that you get where you go online and myancestry.com. That's not going to do it. You need an in-depth analysis, and you will have a Aboriginal Australian DNA in you, even if it's a very minute part. So this is where science is now catching up with what others are saying as well.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I was not aware of that Egyptian. I mean, I've heard things before where people question that everybody comes from Africa, and at the end of the day, conventional science, they go by what they can find in the fossil record. So it's certainly interesting that if they haven't found it yet, then they don't know about it yet. Going back to your UFO sightings, you mentioned that you had group sightings, that other people witnessed these things with you. Does this seem to center around like a specific group of people, or is it just whoever's with you at the time? Is it centered on you personally?
Oh, well, what I tend to find is that when I hold these groups, some of them are experiences that actually never have had an experience with other people. And some people have gone there and they've never had an experience, and then they leave something like that and start having their own experiences. So it's not about me. It's about the intention. I think these things are everywhere, no matter what they are. Sometimes I'm just picking up on them and I've got no connection. Sometimes I do. But it's setting the intention and the vibe for wanting to make and experience something like this, because we don't see we see with our brain, basically. Our eyes and our pineal gland are picking up information, but really if you're open to something, you're going to experience it. And that's where the brain can be a block of one's belief system, where it's just being open to, if this stuff's real, let's experience it. So many people have come to these group Skywatchers. I've had people that have worked for the Air Force, aerospace, engineers, you name it, and they didn't believe. And when they left, they're like, Pete, all I know is that I'm scratching my head leaving here tonight because I can't explain what the hell I saw here with you tonight. And that's where people open up. So it's just something where I think having a good vibe, being open to it, there's a bit more to it than that, but that's the basics. You don't have to be around me to see this. Even just go out and look under the stars and have the intention and you'll see something.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned in the movie that you had missing time that you were able to sort of recapture through hypnosis. I was wondering, do you think that the missing time, is this like a side effect of these interactions that maybe when it happens, your brain can't really comprehend or focus on it that much, so you just sort of forget it? Or do you think that it's being done intentionally by the beings, that in other words, they're making you forget?
Mate, you've got it both ways. And I know this now, that sometimes what they'll do is they'll give me false memories or an experience, and it's only because my human brain can't handle what actually happened. So what happens is the false screen memory, it's not what happened, but the information in it will be symbolic and truthful information that they're trying to relay, because I can't remember it or the brain can't decode it. So I think with both things that you said, that's pretty much my understanding how that operates.
Okay.
That there is a fear factor that some things are just so far for, like, it's like memory wipe's got to happen because you can't remember what happened, because it's just it's like not time, or it's either going to be too extreme for them.
Yeah, and if you're experiencing other dimensions, your brain, just when you look at a shape that you've never seen before, it might not snap into focus if you can't interpret it. So maybe it's just a matter of your brain's inability to interpret it anyways.
Yeah, well, that's where I say to people, like, some of the experiences, it looks like I'm in a kaleidoscope and there's entities within that, but it's just fractal and it's changing and it's living and it's energy. And that's actually what I call the geometric light realms. And it's crazy. Like, some people will say it's like a psychedelic experience. Some of the artwork that I've seen is sort of like it, but it's like living and it's moving and it's got a life of its own, but there's intelligences within it. So that sort of stuff, even that sort of stuff is sort of hard to break down and decode with some of the experiences in that state too.
You mentioned in your show that the governments of the world have made deals with extraterrestrials.
Yeah, well, that was James Gilliland's statement, and I've wrote about that because they have, meaning the extraterrestrials have told me about this in the past, and that there was some, what we could say, not truthful stuff going on, being told to the government with intentions, and they could have allied with those that are in service to others or service to self. And so there is a whole, what we could say, a cabal and group behind the scenes that are interacting with some extraterrestrials that I feel don't have our best interests at heart, but there are other ones that do. And what I do say is, we've got to remember from my own experience, what I say to people is that 5% pretty much out there are what we could say, the rotten apples, making things what they are, blocking them from being the way that they could be. So there has been deals made, and I don't think just going back to the Eisenhower administration, I think it goes back a very long time throughout different civilizations on Earth, and basically blocking us from our full potential. So I think part of what's going on in the world right now, I think, is the undoing of this. I'm not saying that, this is all due to that, but I think what's happening through the current crisis we're in worldwide, it's actually shining a light that there's more to life, and people are actually starting to look into different things, and whether it's metaphysics or UFOs or conspiracies, they're sort of opening up to, going, there's a possibility that some of this has got something to it, because there's some things playing out in the public eye that just don't seem right either. So it's been going on for a long time. We could say these deals, and yeah, that's what I could probably say on the matter.
Are the deals, do they center around maybe allowing these beings to experiment on humans, or what are the deals exactly? Do you know that?
Well, there is deals where there is the common theme that we hear about within the UFO community that I did have confirmed to me that there was substance to it, that for in the exchange of technology, there could be stuff done to certain humans being abducted, but they went a bit overboard with that. There's been the Pleiadians and what we could say councils of different representatives of a conglomerate of races approach not just the US government, but other governments, basically just wanting disclosure in a way that they can introduce this greater reality to not just the American people, but the people of the world. And then you've got some groups that are totally in depth with what we could say black op communities, not just in America, but around the world, that sort of make a conglomerate. That there are reptilians and greys and what I call lower entities that are working and there's some very dark stuff going on. I've even been tortured and taken to a couple of these places over the years. And there has been not just extraterrestrials, but there's been what I'll describe as US and Australian personnel in the facilities that I've been in.
And so you said you've been to some of these facilities.
Well, you wake up and sometimes there's a lot. What I didn't put in the movie was this stuff, but also the hell of a lot of stuff where I've been shot at, black helicopters, surveillance vans, and people tampering with the phone lines and power lines to the home, being broken into and having specifically hard drives stolen and nothing else. So there's everything on my laptop being uploaded, and basically I'm being told from the head of the internet provider company that when they looped it back to 5 different places in the US where everything on my computer was being uploaded, the last place they could backtrack it to was Sandia Labs, and they had to get off the case.
Huh. Wow, that's kind of alarming.
Yeah, well, I've got this all on video too, this conversation, because I just got back from the United States, and every time I open up my laptop, everyone else's connection cut. And we don't have the best internet here in Australia, so when I rang up and asked what happened, he said to plug the computer up to the modem to discount the Wi-Fi connection, and then all of a sudden these numbers in a box appeared on the computer and an alarm. And he was really intrigued, and I'd never seen anything like this in my life, so he asked me if I could give him the code. From my understanding, you put a type of worm into the computer, and he knew something about this code which he didn't explain. And basically what he said was the reason everyone's computer service is shutting down is because the internet's not that great, and it's uploading everything, so everyone's connection's going slow. And then when he put a worm in, it was going to multiple facilities in the United States, and that's where we ended it.
And do you think they're after your video and photographic evidence, or are they tracking your, what you do in your personal life?
I think probably both, but also just trying to figure out what the hell I know. I've spoken to some of these people in different forms of government and that, but I think it's all of the above. But I think the technology keeps getting better to where the surveillance gets easier for them as well, whether if it's hijacking and overshadowing social media or emails or the telephone conversations. I think it just gets easier and easier. So there's nothing to hide. I pretty much share a lot of the best stuff that I've got. There's a lot of volume to the work that I've got meaning to present. But if they want it, they can just come and knock on the door and I'll show it to them and we can have a talk about it. They don't need to be doing this type of stuff about it. It's just, it's just the way that they operate, I guess, with the new age of the, what do we call it? The NSA. That came out to light many years ago that everything was pretty much being monitored. And I think the technology that we know of that the NSA is using is very low level to what they're really using now. Like, years later after it came to light that they were doing what they're doing, can you imagine where they are now? It would be a piece of cake to just get whatever they want on anyone.
Right. I'm actually pretty much convinced that they can surveil all of us at any time that they want. And you may as well just not worry about it, because we're all being watched all the time, probably.
Well, I think, look, we should have our freedoms and our own privacy, but at the same time, I think it is that way now. I think it doesn't matter what you try to do, what app you're using, what devices you're using. The technology I knew that they had even in the 90s, I heard about that we had access to in Australia, where they could get a satellite and they could see thermally through a roof of a home a 50-cent piece on the ground in a kitchen back in the 90s in Australia with what they had access to.
Wow. I remember hearing about a device they had that was basically they could shine a laser on a window and they could listen to your conversation inside of that room because the window would vibrate like a speaker, only the vibrations would be really small, so they'd need like something really sensitive in order to capture it. And this is going back years and years. I mean, who knows how old this technology is.
I knew about that in Australia. I knew that that was being deployed in Australia with certain police and that sort of thing back in the 90s. I heard stories going around that that's what they were using for, investigations and things like that. So the technology is getting better and better. And so I think like anything like that, like we're talking going back to the 90s, that I think police and military were implementing stuff like that, and even certain, what we could say, civilian spies or, people being hired for private investigation. I even heard stories where they had access to this sort of stuff as well. So maybe not to the extreme that the military do or the police, but there was some exotic stuff out there that they had access to as well. So it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. And like you said, imagine what they have now. It's, you know, it might seem like magic to the average person. Wouldn't even.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. You put the iPhone back to 25 years ago, and people would think that that's magic the way it was compared to the other, phones that were around at that time.
Right. One thing you mentioned in your movie was that during hypnosis, a being was speaking through you. And I was curious, was this like an actual being that was inhabiting you, or was it like an implanted message or memory? Do you know exactly how that was working, how that functioned?
Yeah, so there is the full video somewhere up on YouTube. The way I could describe it is that a few minutes into the hypnotherapy session, it looked like I was convulsing, but people who watch it, they go, you can tell it's not Pete doing that. It's literally like my body's convulsing, but not extremely. It's more like I'm vibrating, and I'm vibrating to the point where you can actually see it. It's not like something you got to film me. You can see me shaking. And all of a sudden, the human me just pops up, and it starts completely talking in a different voice. Even the shape of the eyes, even as they're closed, started to go almost almond-like as well, like sort of, it's really weird. But what I remember at that point was me being shifted out of the body looking down, and I could see an entity in my body, and I could see boxes on the other side of my body that looked like to be going to different dimensions with different groups of races in it. And in that video and in that session, Mary asked a lot of questions, hypnotherapist Mary Rodwell, and this being basically told her that Pete knows he's stubborn pretty much to a lot of different things, and that they would be giving me more evidence in time. And you can even see the being in me acting as me, like it looks like me, but there's another intelligence in my body. It's basically what I was saying was it getting the go-ahead to answer what it could and couldn't answer from the beings that were in. It looked like almost like the Brady Bunch intro, but there was different intelligences in these different boxes that were holographically that I could see in an etheric form, because I went into what we could say into a soul form, and I've shifted out of the body, and I could see all these, the boxes, the beings in it, and then the being inside me, and it took on a life of its own, which I didn't expect. Something sort of felt like this might happen, something weird like this. I didn't expect it to be to this extent. And I did another 2 regressions after that with another person, and I stopped after that because it was just full on. It was just, I knew the information that I needed to know already, so it wasn't helping me there. It was more weird stuff happening, like lights being turned on and off on demand, the cameras being turned on and off on demand. And then when I came back to the body, I probably cried for like 45 minutes the last time I did it, because it was so heavy when I jumped back into the human body that I realised why baby's crying. It's because it's so heavy and dense here. That's what I feel anyway, because it was just so heavy that I didn't want to do a regression after that. And I didn't really need to. It was just, the reason I did it was because I had missing time for the first time from what I recall, and Mary offered to do it to see if we could get some resolution on it. And that was why it was done. And then the other couple of times it was sort of to try and glean more information on different things, but it was nothing new to me. I knew pretty much what was being relayed, a large majority of it.
Wow, that's fascinating. It also sounds kind of terrifying, for me, if I'm being honest, because, if you're leaving your body and another being is inhabiting it, it seems like there's possibly a certain loss of control there, maybe. And it's just, that's one thing that I think a lot of people are, terrified of, is the loss of control over yourself. Yeah,
well, there was that sort of effect to where it took me days, if not weeks, and even now I can't watch it. That's why I just put a small clip in the movie. It's something I don't really want to get into, meaning just watching it, because it's sort of, it sort of hits you still. It's like, what the hell, it's like no matter how many times I see a small clip or somebody shows it to me, I just don't really want to watch it.
Mm-hmm.
But there is that component, but at the same time, knowing now what I do about who they are, what they are, and their intentions and their connection to me, I know that they wouldn't do anything like that. But then this goes to show that there is a negative force out there that I have dealt with, that do possess people, that do manipulation. And what I can say to people is possession and everything that I'm talking about is 100% real. And it's a lot to take in for people, I know that, but it opens you up to the whole ramifications of all this, as well as of what's possible and what they can do on a spiritual level, especially the amount of people out there that probably think they've got mental illness, but they're actually either experiencing this stuff or they've been possessed by an entity.
So are these entities, are there some of them are good and some of them are bad, or do you know what their goals might be when they're possessing people?
Well, let's say possession straight up would be a negative thing, would be a negative entity. In this case, it was to try and talk through me to get through to me, because I was being stubborn, as they say, and I'm still sitting on a lot of stuff that I don't speak about. So when it comes to your average possession, that's a very negative thing. It's going against one's free will. It's destroying a lot of people's lives in so, if not all cases, or we'll say nearly all cases. But when it comes to something like what happened with me, it was almost being invoked, we could say, because I was so frustrated wanting answers. But then you do have overshadowing at times, which is where spirit guides or other entities will overshadow. They're not fully possessing, but they're overshadowing somebody to speak through them or to do something. Sometimes it can be a life-saving situation. Sometimes it's to inform somebody with information that could be life-saving or life-changing. So there is this sort of battle going on of good and bad, of what we could say the beings of the light and the beings of what I call the lower light that are distorted and void of light. There is this duality within Source that, the way I understand it, the negative is in place to help one raise their consciousness above the negativity, so we go through an evolutionary process and evolve. And this is where, just like in life, how can you evolve if you don't get out of your comfort zone? And that comfort zone, to get out of it, can be very uncomfortable. It can be very daunting. It can be very negative in some cases, but what can be waiting on the other side can be more amazing than what most humans can imagine.
Huh, interesting. I never thought about it that way. So I guess there's a lot of different aspects to it then.
Oh, this is so layered, mate. Like, we could go on and on with this, and that's the thing, that it's an ever reconnecting journey for myself, and so interesting because it's just so layered. Like, when I first, what we could say, publicly went public about this, and I was on the news and morning news TV shows and preaching the word of, we've got to, listen to these astronauts and military witnesses and people that are willing to testify to Congress and the Australian UFO files, this and that. It's like, I looked at it back then and now look back and go, one is I probably shouldn't have done that, because I don't think a lot of people are ready for it. Or back then, I've been proved differently now because a lot of people are open to this, and I've been proved right about a lot of that now. But if people aren't open to it, it's just not, they can't fathom it. And so I think each person has to be respected that they're on their own journey, and that's up to them if they delve into this stuff. But when you delve into it, so many well-known researchers I've spoken to, they think that they can solve this in 6 months, a year, or they can investigate it and get down to if it's truthful or fake or whatever they want to say. And those same people are here 20, 30, 40 years later, and they still don't know what the hell's going on. And I can tell you, I know a hell of a lot, but I still wouldn't even know 1% out of a trillion percent of what the hell's going on.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting topic. You mentioned in the movie that these beings appear to be looking for people with specific attributes or specific types of people. What type of people are they looking for, or what attributes?
I think it's the soul. I don't think it's just the physical body. I think if it's genetic stuff, yes, or there's that component to it. But I think it's the soul lineage of what that person is, because what I've come to find, and this is where it gets very convoluted, some of these beings that I'm interacting with are different aspects of me in different times and different places, because all our lives are happening at the same time. And some of these beings I fully remember like old friends, and I didn't know how at the start. And I do have a little bit of past life recall before incarnating into the body, and that was with the blue light beings I spoke to of. So there is a component that what's happening is some people are experiencing these experiences because of who they are on a soul level, that they're here, they've got a mission, and whether it's to hold space for humanity, whether it's to contribute through education on whatever matter, it could even be technology. It doesn't just have to be spiritual. It's trying to uplift the human race and the consciousness into an operation, what I call Operation Starseed, where I believe everyone's starseeds unless they've come directly from Source and haven't incarnated before. But there is an operation in place that I call Operation Starseed, where many beings that are highly evolved have been incarnated here to play a part within the human experience to help uplift the human being itself, to their full potential. And that's what we're sort of in the midst of now with all this turmoil and these crises and trials and tribulations, is humanity getting to that. We have to go through the dark night of the soul to reach that.
So they have an end goal agenda would be to basically elevate us to something greater than what we are today.
Yes, but through us realizing it ourselves, what I say to people is these beings aren't going to fix anything. They might stop, we could say, nuclear explosions and certain, we could say, hardcore events that we can't even fathom. But when it comes to talking about, socially, politically, technologically, all the things that we're based around, it's up to us to do it. This is what I keep telling people. Don't look up to the ETs and think that they're going to solve this. They're trying to find us that we've got the power within us. And this is where I find them to be truthful, that as I speak about commonly, these beings themselves are trying to ascend themselves to a higher state of consciousness. They're not even there yet, but they're more evolved, we could say, in some ways than us in a different way. So this is where they're not gods. They're not like all-knowing. They're actually striving, and they've been through what we've been through, and some of them are actually our ancestors or future offspring. So this is where it gets very layered.
So if they're they could be our ancestors or our future offspring, do they exist outside of time as we know it?
Yes, because they're coming from a different time. So it's like if we look at the Pleiades now, and I believe it's 440 light years away, we're not even seeing the Pleiades how it is, but some of the Pleiades that I'm interacting with, they're occupying the same space, but they're in a different frequency and a different time. So this is where it gets convoluted. It's not just, see again, if we're going to look at this linear, even if we look at the Pleiades, you're not going to see it until 440 light years after the fact. And then again, if you're trying to think that they're in our frequency, you're not going to see them because they're an evolved version of us that are in a higher dimension because they've risen to the occasion and they've ascended to that dimension.
Okay.
So even when I've been in star systems with them on ships, what they've shown me is that they can phase, and all of a sudden we go into a different frequency occupying the same space. Sometimes the same planets and stars exist. Sometimes there's different planets, but there's a few of the ones that were in the original frequency. And then sometimes we shift completely, and there's different stars and planets occupying the same space, but not the same time that we're in before we shifted.
And it's interesting. So you mentioned before that when you go on their ships and you travel to somewhere else with them, it's more of like a multidimensional traveling, in that you're physically not necessarily leaving where you're at now, but they're sort of transferring you to their ship, and you can go there without leaving where you are currently.
Yeah, it just depends. I have done some physical experiences, but the way this is operating, again, it's not linear. They can just jump. They just jump anywhere they like. There's even one being from Orion that I interact with, and the Elohim can do this as well. It will physically manifest, and it sort of looks Native American, sort of between Asian, Native American, and a Caucasian, tall and slender. And then he'll turn into a light being with a field around it, encapsulate me in it with my physical body, and then we teleport to where it wants to take me.
Now, when this happens, how do you interact with them? Are you more of an observer following along, or do you get to have conversations, maybe experience their culture? Like, do they have music and games? What happens?
It's different with each individual, but predominantly what happens is it's meetings or, it's basically meetings. That's what's going on, or conversations about a majority of things I can't even speak about, which I hate to say, but it depends on the place and the entity, like where I've got to go. So what I would say is, in the original phases of all this, yes, it was purely being the observer. Because when you're interfacing, and a common thing across the board is I'm getting thoughts, visions, and feelings projected to me while I'm looking at them. And so over time, what I started to realize was that I can project through intention a thought back to them, which would be my question, and then they're projecting. It's almost like books of information are being thrown into my human consciousness. So even within a matter of seconds, I could have a book on an entire topic, And it's just all known. Like what I need to know about that's just known instantaneously. It's not like linear thinking or training where you could spend months, if not years, studying a certain topic. It's just projected into your consciousness straight away. So there, it got to the occasion where now I'm able to project. There's sort of like a two-way dialogue going on. They're projecting thoughts, feelings, and visions to me, and I just project the thought to them. I don't go through thoughts, feelings, and visions. I'll just project the thought back to them, and then they'll give me thoughts, feelings, and visions back. So in the original phase, because you're in awe, you're trying to realize what the hell's going on. You sort of know who these beings are, but you don't know who they are at the same time. It's like a really weird thing. But then you get to a point where you've got this two-way dialogue that started in later years. So, yeah, it's a bit of both now. Still, I'd say being the observer is the main thing. Because being the observer, you're just observing the information. You're observing what you're seeing. You're observing what you're feeling, smelling, all those things through the senses.
One thing from the movie that you actually had pictures of was you had marks on your body. Now, was this from when you went with them, or what was the cause of these marks? And do you know what the purpose of them were?
In that case, I've got scoop marks and everything too, like different ones that weren't shown in the film. I've got a heap of them over the years, of photos of them. But sometimes it will be a genetic thing. But in that case, it was more like a checkup. Because what they'll do sometimes is when they take my physical body to another realm, or we could say on a ship, sometimes what happens is they'll take me up a frequency and then I can't go any higher, so they pull the consciousness out of the human body and I go in a light body form to where I've got to go, and they'll leave the physical body. But sometimes they'll do upgrades. They'll tinker with the physical body and they'll be stuffed on an ethereal level, and then they've got to merge the light body back to the physical body, and then they'll put me back. And so what I remember from that experience was that was sort of a checkup to see how that went the last time I was put back together in terms of the spiritual aspect put with the physical and how things were going, almost like what we could say is a doctor checkup. But it was, as you can see, it's 3 little scoop holes within one scoop, and it glowed under black light for I can't remember how long, but for a while.
And have you ever had any implants or anything like that?
Yes, what I could say is more of the biological nature, and there's times that they'll put some in me for advancing certain abilities or to help with certain abilities, and then they'll pull them out as well. So what I say is that a lot of these implants, yes, we've got Dr. Roger Leah who done fantastic work. He's no longer with us, where they're looking at the isotopic ratio of how some of these implants were constructed, and it's shown that it wasn't done from anything here on Earth. So you can have two elements that are the same element, but the way that the isotopic ratio of how they're constructed can be completely different. And we're pretty much catalogued, from what I know, how everything on Earth is. And he was finding stuff that was like a meteorite or off Earth. But what people are unaware of is that there's biological implants where they can make implants from the material within your body.
Huh,
and
interesting.
They can literally... Yeah, so if you do some interesting research on, biological implants, you'll see how there's been ones pulled out to where there's even an aerial that's biological made from the person's body, and it's pretty much like a transmitter receiver, and it's made from the human's body, and they do that through consciousness by projecting it into the human body with the oversoul of trying to get the body to do something like this. So, and that way it's undetected as well, unless it's uncomfortable for the person in some cases. But because it's your own material, it can go undetected.
Yeah, and that does make a lot more sense than implanting you with, say, I don't know, a computer chip made out of silicone, which is something that your body would reject over time. But using your own tissues, that makes a lot more sense for an implant.
Yes. Well, that's the weird thing too, even with the physical ones, is that the implants were encapsulated in a membrane that, like Dr. Roger Lee used to say with the physical implants, normally something in the body will either sort of like look like it's infected or get encapsulated with pus and push out of the body. In each case, these metal materials, they were encapsulated in some type of membrane that prevented it having a negative reaction to the body to where the body would usually push it out. So that's pretty weird as well.
Yeah. Before we wrap it up, I just have one more question for you. In your bio online, I saw it said that you're a musician. Do you play in a band, or what sort of instrument do you play?
Well, years ago, I've played drums, guitar, bass, piano, and I did music for quite a while. I was doing what we could say, it was sort of like rap rock for years. And it was under the name P-Max, which was short for Peter Maxwell. And so I did that for a lot of years. It was sort of something that I dedicated a lot of time to. But there's some stuff you can find online of that. It's sort of like not where I'm at these days because it's just, it was sort of like punk rock rap sort of stuff. But that was a part of my life. But I still like to pick up the acoustic guitar and give a play every now and then. And I could say that was a very artistic part of me, that a lot of energy in the youth went into that as well.
Okay, well, thanks. And before we finish up, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and your websites and anything else that they can look for you online?
Yeah, so if you just go to petermaxwellslattery.com, there's links there to all social media and YouTube, everything else. So if they just go to petermaxwellslattery.com, they can find links to all the works that I've done and, talks, presentations, things like that, everything in one spot.
Okay, thanks a lot. And I'll put that in the description for this podcast as well. Well, thanks for coming on. It was a fascinating discussion. Usually on this show, we look at more of the nuts and bolts side of these things. So it was really fascinating for me to hear from somebody who has personal experiences with something outside of my normal, I guess, purview, or however you might say it. But I appreciate you coming on. Thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.